All right, I've got 9 o'clock. Thanks for staring at me awkwardly for the last 4 minutes. This morning, we'll continue our study through the book of Judges. We're going to attempt to cover Judges chapter 9 through 12 this morning. So if you want to go ahead and be opening up your Bibles there, Judges chapter 9. This is our 18th class overall, our 15th covering the book of Judges. I think we've got 3 more on the actual text of Judges, and then a couple of review classes to wrap that study up. So we're going to start off talking about Abimelech this morning, picking up kind of towards the end of chapter 8. We didn't really get to go into the story of Abimelech there. But how did things leave off with Gideon? So Gideon, this is kind of a continuation of the Gideon narrative, the Gideon cycle, the story of Abimelech, his son. But how did things leave off with Gideon? Was he able to win his battle against the Midianites? Yeah, they were able to take over Midian, subdue Midian, and then he kind of goes on like a revenge rampage of sorts after that. Remember, like he has the Midianite kings, and he's talking with them. And we've made this allusion, I think, before, but you'll really start to see this in today's class, and I think last class as well. But we've kind of referred to the story and the time period of the Judges as very akin to the old American West, right? You've got these rebels and these outlaws and these sheriffs and these kind of anti-heroes, and they're all kind of running around. Everybody's doing whatever seems right in their own eyes, and you'll see that definitely with the characters that we're going to look at this morning, but definitely starting off with Gideon last time. Gideon, he kind of goes off on this revenge rampage. He's got those 2 kings of Midian. He's got them in his captivity, and he says to them, what kind of men did you kill, back when you were attacking Israel? And they're like, men like you. And then he tells his youngest son, he's like, well, all right, boy, go kill him. And his son couldn't do it because he was too young. So Gideon ends up killing them. So he says, if you hadn't killed these other men, if you hadn't killed my brothers, I would have let you go. And then he also goes off and he attacks 2 cities that had refused to help him. Remember, you had Succoth in verse 16, chapter 8, verse 16, and Penuel in verse 17. 2 cities that he had, in his conquest, was reached out to them for bread, for support. And they said, no, you haven't beaten Midianites yet. We're not going to help you because we don't know how this is going to turn out. He says, all right, when I'm done with them, I'm coming back for you. And then, he came back, and it says that he whipped them with thorns. He taught them a lesson. He tore down their towers, killed them. So you kind of see a little bit of the character of Gideon and how that plays out. So he kind of goes through, it starts off when God calls him. He's this kind of meek individual who's hiding out from the Midians, right? He's treading or thrashing wheat in the winepress, hiding, right? And God approaches him and says, the mighty man of valor. And it's like a joke because he's literally hiding from the enemy and just doing his daily tasks. But he ends up kind of being this warrior by the end of his story, and then even kind of going off the deep end towards the end. But how is Israel faring? Are they serving God at the end of their time with Gideon? No, not really. But kind of, sort of, because they do approach Gideon and they say, "Hey, we want you to be ruler over us." And what's Gideon's response? Yeah, I'm not going to rule over you. God is going to rule over you. So there's flashes of hope there. But what does Gideon do? He collects these spoils, and then what does he make with those spoils? Yeah, this golden ephod. All right, and what does it say happens with that ephod? Yeah, they start to play the harlot with it. So it's almost maybe like this idolized type of Judaism that they set up with this ephod. So it becomes this snare to them. It becomes this problem with them. But after Gideon dies, it says that in chapter 8, verse 33, that Israel again played the harlot with the Baals. And now it gets a little bit more specific this time. It says that they made Baal-berith their god. Now that's kind of salt in the wound for God, because Baal-berith means Lord of the covenant. all right? Lord of the covenant. So it's, there's been this theme, especially starting out in the Gideon narrative, about the people's inability to maintain covenant faithfulness with God. And God is truly the God of the covenant, the God who keeps his covenant. Now they're setting up this Baal Berith, their Lord of the covenant now. Back at the beginning of the Gideon cycle, at the beginning of chapter 6 and verses 7 through 10, when the people cry out to God because of the Midianites' oppression, God sent a prophet to him, right? He sends this prophet, and he basically says, I brought you up out of the land of Egypt. I gave you this land. I am your God. I'm keeping my covenant, but you have not obeyed. Verse 10, you have not obeyed. You haven't kept your covenant. So it was a problem before Gideon. And if you'll recall, so that was the angel of the Lord, the prophet coming and delivering this message on God's behalf to the people about, I told you not to fear and go after these other gods. Anybody remember what the first thing that God has Gideon do?
Tear down an altar.
Yeah, go tear down an altar. Go tear down a Baal and an Asherah pole, right? So it clearly didn't resonate because the people had cried out to God. God says, I told you not to do this, and then he has to raise up Gideon to do this thing. And actually, what's the people's response when Gideon does it? Yeah, they were mad. What have you done? Who is the one who did this thing? So the people are clearly, in the wrong here and continuing to serve after these other ways. But now they've gone full tilt, serving after this Baal Berith, this this Lord of the covenant. They've forgotten about God, it says again. They've forgotten about Gideon. You forgot about God who has saved you since all the way back to Egypt, but now you're dealing unfaithfully. You are not remembering Gideon, who literally just saved you, right? So you're even on a human level not acting faithfully with the people around you. So we're introduced to this son of Gideon, whose name is Abimelech. Now, Gideon, it said, had several wives and ended up having 70 plus sons. And this one son, Abimelech, was said to be the son of one of Gideon's concubines from Shechem. So Abimelech gets this plan. He says, okay, I'm going to go up and I'm going to go to Shechem. I'm going to go to my mother's side of the family. And he kind of cuts himself off from the father's side of the family and his father's clan. But he says, hey, men of Shechem, Jerubbaal, who, that was Gideon's other name, which means, Baal, let Baal contend, Jerubbaal. And it's interesting, all throughout chapter 9, anytime it refers to Gideon, it doesn't use his Hebrew name Gideon, it uses Jerubbaal. He says, hey, Jerubbaal had 70 other sons, and wouldn't you rather me rule over you than have these 70 other men? I'm your brother, after all. I'm your flesh and your blood. I'm your kin. So he's able to convince them that he is obviously better than having these 70 other rulers that they are not related to be in charge over them. And they end up going along with that, and they give him money out of their temple to Baal Berith. They give him 70 shekels of silver. And he takes those shekels of silver, and he goes and hires these worthless men. It says these renegades, these scoundrels, these outlaws. He takes this 70 men, and what does he do with it when he hires them? What's the first thing they go do? Yeah, they go round up his father's sons on that side of the family, all his paternal brothers. They round them all up and they take him, it says, to one stone, and he executes his brothers there. So you almost get the picture, executing 70 men on one stone, that this is just execution after execution after execution at the same place, on the same stone. So he gets 70 shekels to kill 70 men, so 1 shekel per life. That's the value that Abimelech places on his brothers. Then it says that they go and they make him king over all of Shechem. Now it's interesting because from the covenant language that we've seen thus far, right? The fact that God is the God of the covenant. He had kept his covenant. The Israelites had gone after Baal Berith, which means Lord of the covenant. So they've got this new God of the covenant in their midst. They then take money out of the temple to this Baal Berith, and they give it to Abimelech to go do his dastardly deeds. And then they make him king at Shechem. Why is that a big deal? What happened at Shechem here recently? I say recently in our study. Anybody remember back in Joshua? It's a pretty big event that happens at Shechem in Joshua chapter 8. That's where the people renewed their covenant, officially with God in the land. Like Moses had said, when you go into the land to take possession of it, you'll go between Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, and the blessings and the cursings. And Joshua reads all this, and they reestablish this covenant with God at Shechem. But now here, with money from this other God of the covenant, they make another man king over them at this sacred place. But one of the sons of Gideon was able to escape, Jotham. He's able to escape, and when he hears about what's happened, about his other brothers obviously being killed, and now the people making him king over this area, this territory in Shechem specifically, he climbs up on Mount Gerizim, and what does he do? He shouts out at the people, and he pronounces this curse on them. He gives kind of this fable of sorts where he talks about the different trees being approached by other trees to be made king over them. But the point, all of it, is leading to you're going to get what you deserve by the king that you've chosen, by the path that you've taken. And he pronounces this curse on the people. Now that's interesting because, like I said, when they did this renewal ceremony back in Joshua chapter 8 and how Moses had prescribed it, it was actually the blessings that were supposed to come from Mount Gerizim and the curses that were supposed to come from Mount Ebal. But now you've got Jotham here pronouncing this curse on the land, on the people, because of how they've dealt with Gideon and his family. So they make him king, and then Jotham pronounces this curse. And everything seems like it's just going the wrong way. You've kind of got this civil unrest in the land. But another piece of that curse was basically you guys deserve each other. If Abimelech, if you've acted faithfully and you're picking up Abimelech in the way you've chosen him, good on you. And may you guys be his joy, and may he be yours. I hope you guys fare well together. Then it says in the very next section, verse 22, that Abimelech had reigned for 3 years in Israel. So it's an interesting note that this is the shortest time period of oppression in the Judges that God waits to actually deal with this. But it says that God sent an evil spirit between the people of Shechem and Abimelech. All right, so even though it seems like men are in control, men are making their own decisions, men are kind of doing things that seem to be in their best interest, this well-placed phrase that God sent an evil spirit. God is ultimately still in control of how this is going to end up, of how this is going to play out. So the people start acting unruly. It talks about how the men of Shechem had started raiding and setting up these ambushes along the road, and they're just kind of causing trouble in and amongst themselves. And then this guy who's introduced to us named Gaal, he starts to stir up trouble as he comes to town. He starts to rally up the people. And what's his argument for rallying up the people of Shechem? Gaal's. Yeah, that was Abimelech's, right? You had these other 70 rulers, and how about just me? But because I'm related to you, right? Well, Gaal's his argument is the exact same thing. Who's Abimelech that we should serve him? Isn't he the son of Jerubbaal? So Abimelech had been trying to distance himself from his father and play the mother card to be related to the Shechemites to get them to make him king over them. But now a new guy can come into town and make the exact same argument. Isn't he the son of Jerubbaal? Why should we serve him? Why don't we serve somebody who's of the Shechemite line? Why don't we put me in charge, and then I'll make everything better. So they have this night of drinking and celebrating to their god, their Baal Berith, and maybe he's drunk and he's talking about this, and he says, if I was in charge, I'd make it all right. Bring Abimelech out and let me fight him. I'll take care of this. All right. So Zebul, who is kind of a patsy that's in charge in Shechem, who's an ally to Abimelech, he hears about all this going down, and he sends Abimelech a secret message. He says, hey, the people in town are getting antsy, and they're starting to rile up. This Gaal is coming to town, and he's going to rally up the people to his cause, and they're going to try to overthrow you. And so then Abimelech, who kind of seems to be a chip off the old block with his old man, doesn't put up with people who are turning their back on him, right? So he hears about it, and he takes Zebul's advice. Zebul said, hey, at night, why don't you sneak into town, sneak close, and when all the men of the city go out, then you can attack us, all right? So it says that Abimelech, when he gets this note, he hears about it, he's like, yeah, that's a good idea. I'm going to go get my revenge on these people for the way they're trying to turn their back on me. He comes to town, and he waits till the morning, and then he gets up, and they start advancing on the city. And Gaal sees it, and he's standing there next to Zebul, and he says, look, there's people coming down off the mountains. And Zebul's like, no, you're seeing things, just your eyes playing tricks on you. You know, nothing's coming, don't worry about this. He was the one that sent the secret message to Abimelech. He's like, no, don't look over there, that's nothing. And he's like, no, look, I really see people coming. Actually, they're breaking up into two different divisions, and they're coming on into town to fight us. So then Zebul plays his hand, and he's like, all right, where's all your big talk now? You said that you were going to be the one who's going to go up and fight Abimelech. Why don't you go out and fight him? So he goads him, and Gaal plays into that, and then he goes out to try to fight Abimelech. But how does that fare? Not well. It says that he gets beat up, and they get pushed all the way back to the city, and they end up actually running Gaal out of town. And again, if you think about this from a Western movie, it's exactly what it is. It's the plot of all kinds of Western movies. So they run Gaal out of town. Abimelech, is still mad about how this all went down. So the very next day, it says that the people of Shechem go kind of back out into the fields to kind of go business as normal. But Abimelech is still not happy about how all this went down. So he waits till the people come out into the fields to do their work for the day, and he attacks them. All right, and he sets some men up in front of the city to where they can't come back in, and then he starts to demolish the city itself and to fight against the city all day, and he ends up taking it. And it says that some of the people had decided to flee back into the city of Shechem, into the temple of Baal Berith. Again, trying to take refuge in this false god. We see how that plays out for him. But Abimelech, when he sees all the people kind of taking refuge in this stronghold, it seems like in the middle of the city, he goes up and he gets all of his men with him to gather up a bunch of firewood, and they come and they lay it at the outside of the stronghold of the temple, and they light it on fire. And it says that everybody in the temple died. It was about 1,000 men and women who died. So now he's on this rampage, kind of a lot like his dad. And interestingly enough, that's how this started off. Was I'm not part of that. I'm not my dad. I'm with my mom and my mom's family, right? So now he's getting to be more and more like his old man. He's on this rampage. It says that he goes to the nearby Thebez to do the same thing, right? So you guys were probably in cahoots with him. So now I'm going to come and I'm going to fight you. So he goes to Thebez and fights that city, takes it, but people had done kind of a similar thing. They hole up in this tower in the middle of the city. All right, so they hole up there for protection, and he's going to try to light it on fire and burn it down, burn them out, just like he did at Shechem. But how does it fare here? It doesn't fare, right? He goes up to the entrance to the tower, and what happens? Yeah, it just says a certain woman, a random woman, dropped a random single millstone, and it falls on Abimelech's head, and it says that it cracks his skull, it crushes his head. All right, and he's, I guess, somehow got enough sense left in him to where he turns to his armor bearer and he says, kill me, run your sword through me, because I don't want them saying that a woman killed me. And so he does it, he runs them through. But here we are thousands of years later, and who killed Abimelech? Right, the woman. Actually, even in not too far removed from this, in Samuel's day, they talk about the woman that dropped the millstone and killed Abimelech. Right. So, despite his attempts to try to get out of it and saying that a woman didn't kill him, that's still what we're talking about today. So, the guy Abimelech, who played the female card to try to seize the throne, and he ends up falling victim to a woman. And the man who killed all of his brothers on the single stone is said to be killed by a single stone dropped by a single lady. So God easily deals with Abimelech, and says that it fulfills the curse of Jotham that he had pronounced from Mount Gerizim. Then everybody just goes home. It's almost like they were in some type of a zombie trance, following Abimelech around in his campaign to get power, to hold on to power, and to seek revenge on anybody that tries to take it from him. And then he dies, and they're just like, well, I guess that's it. It doesn't even talk about them finishing what they're doing at Thebez. They just go home. Everybody just leaves and goes back to their own place. So in a story where we've got men trying to make it themselves, trying to make their own way, establish their own greatness, there's these few well-placed phrases throughout this narrative that tells us that God is still ultimately the one who is in control. And no matter who the people try to make their king, or whoever tries to make themselves a king in the process, God is still the one true king. They've broken covenant faithfulness here. They've put at this other God of the covenant, this Baal Berith, in its place, and now you see this true Canaanization starting to take place among the people, and God lets them have it, right? I mean, it's very similar to how Paul talks about it in Romans chapter 1. If that's what you want, I'll give it to you. If you want to go after that, I will let you have it. And that in and of itself is a form of punishment. And it says that, like Jotham's curse, that you guys deserve each other. And God says, if that's what you want, that's what I'll give you. And that doesn't turn out like they want, but it is the natural outcome of always turning away from God. Does anybody have any other thoughts or questions on Abimelech? I spent way too much time on that. All right, so then moving into, somebody say something? Moving into chapter 10, you've got two minor judges that are quickly spoken of here, Tola and Jair. Tola, neither one of these you get a lot of information on. It says that he's the son of Puah, the son of Dodo. He's the only judge, both minor or major, who is given a genealogy back to a third generation. That might mean that he has some type of a stature, that he might have some type of a status. And you'll start to be this, especially with Abimelech and coming off of Gideon, this being something of a theme among the people of almost trying to establish and maintain their own type of monarchy. So maybe with somebody like a Tola, who it's referenced as going back to a third generation, maybe that's saying like, okay, because of his stature, because of his status, he was in this type of position. All it really says is that he saves Israel. Doesn't even give who he saved Israel from. Maybe he was tied into the Abimelech story, but it does say that this took place after Abimelech. One thing that's pretty interesting, it says that he is from Issachar, so he's of the tribe of Issachar, but where does he live? But he lives in Ephraim. All right, so why is a man from Issachar living in the land of Ephraim? I don't know. We don't have the details, but maybe this is something kind of similar to the Danites. When they tried to take the land, they ended up moving somewhere else that was easier to possess. So maybe that's something's going on similar with the men of Issachar and Tola here. He leads Israel for 23 years, and then there's Jair, who it says is from Gilead. So now we're kind of introduced to Gilead, which is the land that's on the east side of the Jordan, and that will kind of set the stage for what's to come in the next story. It says that he had 30 sons who rode on 30 donkeys, and that he had 30 towns named after him. So again, if you kind of think about the Israelites maybe trying to establish some type of a monarchy amongst themselves, if you've got a guy that has 30 sons, you probably have to have a harem to have that come to pass. So trying to amass this power, amass this name for himself. He's clearly a powerful man. He's got wealth. He has these 30 sons who can have 30 donkeys, which is kind of a sign of nobility. He has these 30 towns named after him, all right, in the place of Gilead. And he leads Israel for 22 years. But despite his pampered 30 sons, working in Gilead and having these cities in Gilead, Gilead's the scene for our next judge and the next oppressor coming from Ammon. So moving into chapter 10, starting in verse 6, it says that again the children of the Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and started to go after and serve these other gods. And it lists off the Baals, the Asherahs, the gods of Syria, the gods of Sidon, the gods of Moab, the gods of the people of Ammon, and the gods of the Philistines. He lists off 7. What does 7 mean? And you see the number 7 repeated like this in Scripture. What is it usually a representation of? Yeah, perfection, completeness, totality, right? These people have completely abandoned God and completely served after these other gods when it lists off 6 to them. So they're complete depravity and their complete turning away from God. So it says that God sells them into the hands of the Philistines and the Ammonites, all right? So that was the last 2 gods that were mentioned, the gods of Ammon, the gods of the Philistines. And so he sells them in the hands of these nations. So they'll be the two nations that we'll deal with in these last two major cycles, Samson with the Philistines, and now here Jephthah with the Ammonites. So again, Israel cries out to God. But there's something a little bit unique about this time when they cry out to God as compared to the other times that we've seen them cry out to God in the book of Judges. What's unique about this instance? Yeah. Yeah, they admit to it, right? They actually there is a sense of confession here. Like, we have gone after and served these other gods. All the other times it just talks about them crying out to God, God having compassion on them, God raising up a deliverer and saving them. But here they actually talk about how they've gone after these other gods. They have forsaken their true God and served these Baals. So they admit to what God is talking about here. But then God's response to them is a little bit different as well, right? Because all the other times when it talked about how Israel cried out to God, it pretty much immediately says that God, had compassion. God raised up a deliverer. But what's God's response here? Yeah. I'm not going to do it again. He actually lists off. He's like, I've saved you from. And he lists off 7 different nations again. Right? It starts off with, I think, the Egyptians, and then ends off with the Amalekites. I can't remember, but he lists off 7 nations, right? And so again, the point being, I've completely saved you. You've completely turned away, and I've completely saved you over and over and over again. There's a pattern here, and I'm not going to do it anymore. I will no longer deliver you. Cry out to your other gods, right? If that's who you want to go after, if that's what you want to serve, then go do it. But interestingly, and that's the last time we hear from God for quite a while, by the way. But Israel seems to double down on their confession and their repentance, because it says that no, we've sinned. Do what seems best to you. But what do they say? Just save us today, right? Just save us today. Just if you could save us today, that we'll be good. Just to do that, and we'll be all square. But it does say that they put away their other gods and they start to serve the Lord. But I think based on how God has seen this play out in the past, again, stressing their totality and their completeness of turning away from him, he knows this game. He's seen this narrative play out several times before. So God says he won't deliver them anymore. And there is no response after that. After the people say, just save us today, God doesn't have an answer. It's just silence. It's just quiet. And what's the next thing we read about happening there? In verse 17. Or actually, if I take it back before I get to that, verse 16, I think Bobby mentioned this. It says that God's soul could no longer endure the misery of Israel. Now, there's 2 ways to look at that phrase. One would be kind of like how we've looked at it at previous points in the cycle, that the people cry out and God sees the genuineness of their need and has compassion on them, and he relents from his punishment and raises up a deliverer, that he can't deal with seeing Israel be in pain, so he does something about it. That's one way to look at it. The other way is that God is made miserable by Israel doing this over and over and over again. And the Hebrew, I think, tends to lend more towards that interpretation, because the literal Hebrew rendering of this verse says that the Lord's soul was short with Israel's work. All right? The Lord's soul was short with Israel's work. So that would tend to mean that God's running out of patience. God's frustrated. He's exasperated with how the Israelites have continually tried to do this, and now they're doing it again. Maybe this fake work, these evil works, and even trying to feign religious adherence to him and his word. So I tend to look at it more that way. But it ends up with the very next verse that the people of Ammon gather up together to go fight Israel. Right. So there is no response from God. The response is the Ammonites come to fight against Israel. Then the leaders of Gilead get together at Mizpah, and they say, what are we going to do to figure this one out? How are we going to get ourselves out of this mess? Right? They don't inquire of God. They don't offer up prayers to him. Who are you going to raise up for us? They say, what are we going to do? How are we going to figure this one out? How are we going to get out of this situation? So you're introduced to Jephthah in the next verse, chapter 11, verse 1. In kind of a flashback type of a way from the story. It says that there's this Gileadite So that's good. That's exactly who the Gileadites are going to be looking for. There's someone who's of their tribe, of their kin, related to them. That's good. He's a mighty man of valor. Great. That's exactly what we need to get out of this situation. But we need a little bit more backstory, because why wouldn't the Gileadites just go get Jephthah, bring him back? He fights, they win, everybody's happy. Right? You need a little bit of backstory to set up Jephthah here. It says he was a mighty man of valor, but he was the son of a harlot. Mighty man of valor, but the son of a harlot. So it appears his father, who is apparently named Gilead, had committed this marital indiscretion, had sex with a prostitute. Jephthah was the result of that. And from the way the text reads, it appears that Gilead does, or tries to do, the honorable thing and bring Jephthah into his house and raise him up as his son. But there's a problem. When Gilead's legitimate sons grow up, they try to drive Jephthah out, right? They say, you'll have no inheritance with us. This almost kind of becomes something of like a legal inheritance type dispute. You'll have no inheritance with us. You're the son of another woman. You really aren't one of us. You need to get out of here. And we'll see that this, maybe even, like I said, from a legal dispute standpoint, the elders get involved, as we'll learn later, and they cast Jephthah out. And he runs away, it says, to the land of Tob. Now, Tob in Hebrew means good. So can you think of another story where someone's brothers drive them away and God uses it for good? Right? Yeah, similar language with Joseph. So Jephthah, even though he runs to this land of Tob, he runs to this land of good, he's anything but good when he gets there, right? He, again, kind of sticking with that Western motif, gets this band of scoundrels. They get together and they start raiding all over town, right? And so they're worthless or empty and reckless men, right? No morals. No, they're just running around doing whatever they want to do. But ironically, because he's over there and has been driven to the land of Tob, we get to see how he got to be good at what he's good at in the land of good. All right. Now, it doesn't seem like he is as bad as Abimelech, but you do start to see some of the comparisons between the two of them, being kind of, something of an outcast and, not really part of their family, and getting these renegades together to go fight together. So the stage is set for him to kind of be the anti-hero of sorts, the Han Solo or the Doc Holliday, right? So back to present day, the story goes, the Ammonites are now warring against Israel, and the Gileadites have no choice but to turn to Jephthah. Right? They have to go crawling back to the one that they had previously run out of town. And note that God still isn't mentioned as an actor up to this point in raising Jephthah up. The people are kind of taking this on themselves to go do this. This is a human endeavor thus far. So they go up to Jephthah and they say, come back and be our commander. And you kind of see the human way in which they're trying to negotiate, because they had previously said at the end of chapter 10 that whoever goes up to fight for us will be made head over us. And they offer him this lower title of commander, right? And there's a difference, as we'll see in just a second. So they offer him and they're trying to negotiate with him. And then Jephthah says, well, wait a second, didn't you guys hate me? Didn't you cast me out of town? Didn't you run me off? And now you're coming back to me when you're in trouble? Does this dialogue, does this interchange sound familiar to something we literally just read? It's the same structure as chapter 10, right? With God, or the people crying out to God. And it's the same thing playing out here with Gilead and Jephthah. But they say, yeah, but that's enough about that. The past is in the past. We need you now. That's why we're turning to you. We want you to come back. If you do come back, we'll bring you back into the family, and we'll make you head over us. All right, so it goes back to head now. So Jephthah is negotiating from the position of strength, from the position of power, and they say, okay, well, if you come back, we'll make you commander and head over us. And that's exactly what happens. It says that they go up to Mizpah at this point, and they make Jephthah head and commander over them. It says that this is ratified before the Lord. They proclaim this before God. They insert God's name in the vows. But so God's name is being used. The people are putting his name in their mouth, but God's still not actively on the scene yet. All right, God hasn't actually done anything, at least from a textual standpoint, to this point. And I think the interesting thing, kind of like how Abimelech was at Shechem, and that was a previous place of importance, when they ratify this and they make Jephthah the commander and head over the army at Mizpah, there's nothing special about Mizpah. It's not a sacred site. Tell you who was at Mizpah was the army. That's where they had gathered the army of the Gileadites together. So that seems like who the people are really interested in seeing Jephthah made commander and head over in front of the army, not necessarily God. So where God refused to be used by this rebellious and obstinate and transactional people, like I'll do this if you do that for me, Jephthah is willing to go along with that. Then he takes these messengers and he sends them off to the king of Ammon, so he kind of steps right into the role of being head and being commander. He sends these messages off to the king of Ammon, and he says, what are you doing? Why are you coming up to fight against me? And then what's the king of Ammon's response? We want our land back. You've got our land. We want it. Give it back to us. We can end this peacefully. And then so Jephthah's name, by the way, means he opens. So he's one who's constantly opening his mouth. Sometimes he's able to work for him, as it was with his negotiating tactics with the Gileadites. Here it doesn't fare so well. And then just a minute with his vow, when he opens his mouth, it fares even worse. But his name means he opens. So he opens his mouth back to the king in response. And what's he say? Kind of gives this lengthy historical lecture to the king of Ammon. And I'll tell you one thing, people who are in kingly positions of authority love getting lectured to. So this is going to go out really well. So Jephthah gives this long historical lecture to the king of Ammon about why the land isn't yours. And it's basically kind of broken off of, first off, we never took any land from Ammon. When we came up here, we tried to move peacefully through this whole eastern territory. We never even bumped into you. Our beef was primarily with Sihon of the Amorites, not the Ammonites. All right? There's a distinction between those two groups. And I do think it's an interesting kind of veiled threat in his bringing up Sihon, because what does he say about that incident? Because when Sihon came up to fight against us, we didn't try to fight him. He tried to fight us, just like you're doing, and we beat him. God gave Sihon into our hands. So it's kind of like this veiled threat in his talking back. He talks about how God had given Israel this land, the land of the Amorites, again, not the land of the Ammonites who they're fighting with now. So what right do you have to claim possession of it? And then he starts to mix up his theology, and then he basically compares Yahweh, he compares Jehovah to Chemosh, who he says is the king of Ammon's God. Interestingly enough, Chemosh was a Moabite god, but not an Ammonite one. But he says, your deity gave you, or our deity gave us what's ours. So he's kind of just making God another localized pagan type deity. Our God gave us what's ours. Chemosh, your God gave you what's yours. Who can argue with that, right? And the gods have decided. What are you trying to do here? Interestingly enough, and back in Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 19, it says, this is God talking, and when you come near the people of Ammon, do not harass them or meddle with them, for I will not give you any of the land of the people of Ammon as a possession, because I've given it to the descendants of Lot as a possession. So was it Chemosh that gave the Ammonites their land? No, it was God. And if Jephthah kind of knew his Israelite history, he didn't seem to know the Torah. He didn't seem to know the actual word of God, because if he did, he wouldn't have said that. He would have said, God gave you yours, God gave me mine. That's what's that. Not Chemosh gave you this, and God gave us that. And then lastly, he says, we've been here for 300 years, and you never try to take that land back during that time. So what gives? Then he says in verse 27, probably the only good thing that ever comes out of his mouth when he opens it, says, may the Lord the judge render judgment this day between the children of Israel and the people of Ammon. All right, so he kind of offers up the statement of faith that I know I'm in the right, I know I serve the God who is in the right, and he'll be the ultimate judge over the people of Israel and the people of Ammon this day. But the king of Ammon blows him off and says that he just basically casts away his message, takes it, tosses it in the trash. This trying to figure things out with words was never going to be a fruitful endeavor. Jephthah wasn't going to get out of things that easily. And right after that statement of faith about how God is the judge, and God will discern between the people of Ammon, between the people of Israel, it says that the Spirit of the Lord came on Jephthah in verse 29. So right after Jephthah kind of makes this great statement of faith, it says the Spirit of the Lord came on Jephthah. And also from a timing perspective, that is before he makes his vow. Right? So right after his statement of faith, Spirit given, before the vow is actually made. And again, we've made this point with previous judges, and we'll definitely make it with the judges that's coming up in just a second. But the Spirit of God working through the people, through these individuals, doesn't presuppose any particular level of spirituality on behalf of the people. Really, all it affirms is God's involvement. And this is the first time we've read about God being involved in the story since his silence to the Gileadites' response to what are you going to do for us, or just save us this day. So by the Spirit, Jephthah moves through Gilead and he advances the people to go up and fight. And then right on the eve of battle, Jephthah opens up his mouth again. Right? He opens. The narrative is kind of completely derailed and taken away from God's Spirit working in him, of the redeeming grace of God saving Israel. And instead now, from here on out, it's focused on the words of a man and making this rash and unfortunate vow. And what is the vow? Yeah, he says, if you will help me beat the Ammonites, then I'll give you the first thing that ever comes out of my house when I get home, right? And actually, the phraseology there, it says whatever, I think, in a lot of the English renderings, but it could also be whoever. So he could have very well known that it was going to be a person. It uses the masculine terminology, so I don't think he expected it to be his daughter. But nonetheless, he says, whatever comes out of my house when I return, I'll offer it up as a burnt offering. And again, kind of like with God and Gilead back in chapter 10, how does God respond to that? He doesn't. God's not a party to this vow, right? His Spirit came on Jephthah before, and he was always going to deliver the hand of the people of Ammon into his hand. Jephthah just rashly steps aside and does this, and God doesn't say anything about it. So, like I said, God goes ahead and does what he was already going to do, because he had already empowered Jephthah before the vow was even brought to mind. And then Jephthah is able to defeat the Ammonites with a great slaughter. Then what should have been a hero's triumphant return and going home to the sound of timbrels and making merry, making joy. There's timbrels, but what is the first thing that comes out of his house when he gets there? His daughter. His daughter comes out. And you kind of get to see something of the character of Jephthah, because when he sees his daughter coming out, how does he respond? It says he tears his clothes, and then what does he say to his daughter? You make me low. Right? So, you kind of see it's not really even about his daughter. It's you have brought me low. That's the bad thing about this situation. Not that you have to be sacrificed, but you've brought me low. And you have become like one of the ones who trouble me. All right? So you get to see something of the character of Jephthah played out there versus the character of his daughter, who says, well, if you made a vow to God, you need to keep it and do to me whatever needs to be done. Everybody tries to go back and forth on what happens next, whether he actually does it or not, whether he actually offers up his human sacrifice of his daughter to God or whether he doesn't. I'm probably, just to kind of get this out of the way, I'm probably in the camp that thinks he actually does. The text taken at face value says that he did as he had vowed. So, leaving it with that. And there's a play on words, I think, in the very next section. But you see his unfortunate ignorance and not knowing the law of God. So he knew his Israelite history, but he doesn't understand and know the law of God. He already compared God to Chemosh, to the gods of the land, kind of making them like one and the same. But God is nothing like the gods of Canaan. He's nothing like Chemosh. He's nothing like the gods that Yahweh had warned them about, who are into human sacrifice. God abhors human sacrifice. It says in Jeremiah, I think 3 or 4 times, that he hates it, and it never even came into his mind. It was never intended by God for that to happen. And additionally, in Leviticus chapter 27, there's actually something of a carve-out for when people make a vow or a covenant that relates to the giving of a person. And there's a monetary out for that. But Jephthah doesn't seem to do with it. It says that he goes ahead and he does what he had vowed to do. And so the story that started off with Jephthah being the son of a harlot ends with him being the father of an innocent virgin who is sacrificed. So you get to see that kind of come full all the way around. Then the chapter closes about talking about how before the sacrifice, he lets her go and kind of mourn with her friends the fact that she'll die a virgin and she'll never marry. And that ultimately became a custom in Israel because of this unfortunate event. Then moving into, I'm going to do it again. Moving into chapter 12, Ephraim, who seems to always kind of have a chip on their shoulder, they say, hey, when you went out to fight, why didn't you call us for help? We're going to burn your house down with you in it. I think that's the play on words that I was referring to, because if he did just offer up his daughter, which was his only daughter, and remember it was he's sandwiched by two other judges in Jair and Ibzan, who have a lot of family. He just had one daughter, so he's killing his family line in the process. But the people of Ephraim come out and say, we're going to burn your house down, offer it up with fire. So kind of maybe playing on words and pouring salt in Jephthah's wounds about what he just had to do. But he says, why are you fighting against me? So kind of the similar way this happened with the king of Ammon. Why are you fighting against me? Why are you coming up to make trouble with me? Didn't I call you up? Although there's no reference to that actually happening. Then Jephthah doesn't give him give Ephraim the same courtesy that he gave to the king of Ammon and trying to figure this thing out. He just goes straight and fights with him. And they end up killing a lot of Ephraimites. They have this say Shibboleth type deal, this story where they can't say the word correctly. And so you get to see, with Jephthah, his mouth opens, that's what his name means. It all ends with words destroying people, right? This vow that he makes that happens to destroy his daughter, and now this Shibboleth, which all it really means is an ear of grain. It's basically this big nothing word, but if you can't say it right, you're going to die. And that's how the story of Jephthah ends. 42,000 Ephraimites are killed, and he ends up judging Israel for 6 years. And that's that. Gloria, yeah. Yes. Yeah. And for those of you who couldn't hear, what Gloria is talking about is in Hebrews in the Hall of Faith. That he's Jephthah's one of the ones that's kind of quickly mentioned of Barak and Jephthah and Gilead, all these other ones. But these are, I think the point is, they had their faith because they did have faith in God and then act on it. But they're also flawed individuals as well. So, very good. Thank you.